In the words of the fabled and great Max Kellerman of ESPN, these 5 things I know are true. 1. Edge winning the WWE Royal Rumble is good. 2. Bianca Belair winning the Women's Royal Rumble is great. 3. Seeing people get run over by golf carts will always be funny. 4. The younger talent of the WWE is absolutely doomed. And 5. Sometimes wrestling is goofy, and sometimes wrestling is bullshit. I'm Nirvana Sparkle. Welcome to a new wrestling experience. This is Goofy Wrestling Bullshit, the Royal Rumble edition. Now, what the heck is this show? What will this show be? Well, it will be a weekly wrestling podcast celebrating the silly, the absurd, the illogical. Because the WWE is best when it is illogical. So, we're not going to be like every other wrestling podcast and whine and bitch and complain and moan about bad booking decisions, constantly calling Vince McMahon out of touch. No, that's for the other 10 million unintelligent, uneducated other wrestling podcasts that exist out there, except for a couple, of course, that I follow. You know who you are. Outside of that small little smudging group, all you need some education. That's what I hope this show will bring you. Sometimes I will be flanked by my brother from another mother, Tyler Wooters, but most times it will be me. This show has been, essentially, nearly 11 years in the thought process. I've been wanting to do a wrestling show on this channel consistently since the very beginning. Now, I'm finally going to do it. Now, mostly, this show will take place every Saturday morning or afternoon, but because of the 2021 Royal Rumble last night, we're doing it now. Now, how are the segments gonna go? Well, we're going to give a quick recap of what happened really fast. We're going to talk about the good and bad things, and then we're going to open it up to my opinion in something that I like to call the throne room. This will be my final thoughts on the event, in this case, or things that I find worth opinionating, with sometimes fantasy booking involved. So, with that said, the 2021 Royal Rumble took place last night at the Tampa Bay Ray version of the Thunderdome. 2 Royal Rumble matches took place in which Edge and Bianca Belair won their respective Royal Rumble matches. Edge coming from the number 1 spot and Bianca Belair coming from the 3 spot. Return and guest appearances included that of Carlito, Joanne Hall, Victoria the Hurricane, Christian with a heartwarming reunion of sorts, and Tori Wilson. If you're wondering where Keith Lee was, due to Mia Yim getting the disease that shall not be named. He unfortunately had to quarantine himself as well and had to leave the event. It is my belief that Santana and also Damian Priest were used as substitutions for their respective spots. Also, Kane showed up and did a thing too. By and large, the two Rumbles were excellent. As for the world title affairs, Goldberg and Drew McIntyre had a finisher fest with all finishers on, but Drew's Claymore outdid a jackhammer spear combination. In fact, 3 spears, one before the match, with the OMG activated for anybody who plays WWE 2K. As for the Universal Championship, the expected ending of Roman Reigns retaining the Universal title was the play here, but spot fest galore, and Kevin Owens putting on probably his best championship performance. And oh yeah, golf carts. I'll get to that in the good and the bad here in a second. Plus, there was a women's tag team title match in the pre-show. So now that you've been quickly caught up with results, let's get in more detail. Good and bad time. Starting with the one bad thing. It's not the notion that Shayna and Shayna Baszler, won the tag team titles again. No, that's not the bad thing. That was the expected thing. The right thing. Especially if they're going to do Charlotte Asuka, the salty run back from 2 years ago in 68 days at this year's WrestleMania. No, that's not the bad. The bad is the fact that the women's tag team championships still exist on this plane of existence. For those not in the current wrestling know, let me give you guys a little bit of a history lesson when it comes to these titles. The WWE Women's Tag Team titles, originally introduced in the 1980s, were bitched, and yes, I will say the word bitched, into existence by Sasha Banks and Bayley in 2019. Pretty much to prop up their feud within a friendship. Seeing that the women's revolution had little to no other place to go, the women demanded, mainly Sasha and Bayley, that new titles be introduced to expand upon it. The women's tag team titles were born and were first given out in an Elimination Chamber match that was actually good to Sasha Banks and Bayley. But ever since that day, the women's tag team titles have been nothing more than a forgotten toy and a prop. So much so that Asuka's won them twice. Sasha and Bayley won them twice. The Moronics have won them once. Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler have them twice. And yes, even Charlotte can add one. In fact, they've been trying to do that with 2 separate tag teams. All in all, without a consistent going tag team roster. These tag teams are made in a blender and tossed together and quickly pureed into something terrible. The fact that these titles still exist are a miracle, let alone Nia can say she's won something, anything, twice. But enough about that horrible thing. That was the only bad thing. The good in the Royal Rumble was everything else. Edge and Bianca Belair winning the Rumbles are two things that absolutely needed to happen. They're the best stories going into the Rumble by a mile, especially Edge's. Sure, you could have done the same thing with a Daniel Bryan and made the internet wrestling community lose their minds and the pseudo virginity that they still have, but by and large, that's the only way you could have made them any happier last night. Here's the downside to that. You'd be basically doing the same thing regardless. Edge has a longer time away from the ring. And keep in mind that he never technically lost the World Heavyweight title nearly a decade ago. Go after defeating Alberto Del Rio, and this is a good way to get them all the way back. The problem is, what do you do after? And plus, you have to keep The Miz in mind. Bianca Belair winning sets up a mega match between her and Sasha Banks. Don't be surprised, however, if they all of a sudden throw Rhea Ripley into the mix, or Charlotte into the mix. Good God. If they do both of those things, I'll be regretting this episode relatively quickly. As for the world titles themselves, the right persons won them. You can't have the tribal godfather losing his empire this quickly. You can't have Kevin Owens look bad because Kevin Owens needs to look good when he eventually wins probably another mid-card title. And Drew should only lose in 68 days from now. The only major problem with both of these things is the impact and the presence of The Miz in this situation. See, as I like to call him, Rainbow Dash still has the Money in the Bank briefcase, and Rainbow Dash keeps teasing that he's going to come in like a Wonderbolt and steal people's thunder. And what better thunder stealing moment than at Mania itself? Especially considering that Mania was supposed to be in the Miz's hometown of LA. So yes, this might be leftover booking from a WrestleMania that was supposed to take place on the other end of the country, and they're not going to write it out. So sadly, either Edge's fairy tale is going to be cut short, creating major heel heat, or Roman Reigns is going to get duped. Either way, the WWE loses. It's bad booking either way, sadly. But that's a situation we can talk about in about 3 months' time. This is not the show for that. By and large, the Royal Rumble was really good, and keeps up the WWE's good streak of pay-per-view victories. Definitely a 5 out of 6 show if I'm using my old pony review scale for this show. Most definitely. But now that you've known the good and the bad and objective reasoning, it's time to go to my throne room and give you my thoughts overall on the event and what could it lead to in the future and any other gripes. When I enter my throne room for the first time overlooking the stained glass windows in my beloved cutie mark throne, looking upon the Royal Rumble in retrospect, I see a lot of positive things, a lot of positive moves, and a lot of happy people out there celebrating WWE doing a good thing for once. Yes, in the short term, doing the good things. But let me give you some aspects here. I used the Royal Rumble and WrestleMania as tuning forks. Tuning forks about the year that was and the year that's going to be. The year that's going to be the 6 months down the line. By the time we get to SummerSlam and beyond, the tuning fork of WrestleMania will tell me the remaining rest of the year and what they're going to do about it. And sadly, not everything is golden here in my throne room. Not everything about this scroll, about the Royal Rumble reads good. Mainly because of the future. I'm sure if you followed the wrestling internet community over the past few hours, a lot of them have been bemoaning Edge's victory. WWE picking another part-timer to lead us down the seas of WrestleMania's rough waters. Although, yes, I did just recently say just a few seconds ago that Edge winning the Royal Rumble was the best move, and I stand by that. But, going to my tuning fork theory, it is absolutely a detriment on the future of the WWE's roster. Let me give y'all a stat. In fact, a couple of them. These stats might scare you. It might frighten you. And it might take the wind out of the happy sails for some of you. See, I've been keeping track of every NXT wrestler that has ever been shown on TV that has been made the call to the main roster for more than just one match. It scores to about 100 wrestlers by this point. If you include the mid-card championships, tag team championships, intercontinental and US titles, as well as the cruiserweight or 24/7 titles, out of the nearly 100 wrestlers that have come from the NXT experiment over the last 10 years, only 32 wrestlers that have ever appeared on WWE TV proper, Raw and SmackDown and pay-per-views, have gone on to win a championship of some sort. And that's combining both the men's and women's rosters. Although my numbers may not be exactly correct, but it's certainly near that number, which is horrifyingly low. It only gives you about a 32% at best success rate. That's already horrifyingly terrible. But if I expand or shrink in the size, to just the world titles themselves, Universal and the women's titles, it shrinks all the way down to 17. As of this recording, only 17 people from the NXT experiment can call themselves a world champion, technically giving Drew McIntyre part of this rub is not something I typically do, so it's 16. And that's especially if I'm not counting the now John Moxley, Dean Ambrose on this list. In other words, it's dangerously low. So dangerously low that it's an issue. An issue that needs to be solved quickly. With Edge winning the Royal Rumble from the number one spot, joining only Shawn Michaels and the other who shall not be named in the wrestling circle to win from the one slot, the fact that NXT nobody under the age of, let's say, 35, which oddly enough, tomorrow I turn age 37, and the WWE would have more faith in me carrying on a world title if I had any kind of wrestling knowledge to physically do it. Darn cerebral palsy and whatnot. But they would have more faith in me than any of these NXTers. And I know other podcasts would blame the booking, blame Vince McMahon. But as I've said on other YouTube videos here on this very channel, it's neither of those things. Oh no, it's the NXT home base, the Performance Center itself, that is a failure. NXT Performance Center may teach them how to be wrestlers. It may teach them how to physically wrestle well, how to take bumps, how to run, how to do punches, and other sorts of flippy shit. It may make them even TV presentable. But what it doesn't do is create character. It doesn't create that next level form. Yes, it has a promo school. And yes, that promo school was featured in the WWE reality show Breaking Ground from the earliest year of the now soon to be defunct WWE network. But that promo school doesn't bring about character, doesn't bring about attitude. It doesn't bring about inflecting emotions in front of a crowd or speaking higher than your highest voice. It's not charisma. It's not that added drive. It's not putting ego upon yourself. That isn't taught to the A level that everything else is taught in the Performance Center. The Performance Center should not be called the Performance Center. It should be called a drone factory. Because that's what NXT produces. Uncharismatic, ununique, and unpersonable drones. Given one or two personality traits and then shucked out to the world only to be asked to rely purely on their wrestling talent and their indie credibility. But there's only so much that can drive you to. Sometimes you gotta have it. And there's only one superstar in the current WWE that I would say has it. That is not Bianca Belair, and that's Bray Wyatt. I've come to the constant defense of this man, and even called his first world championship win on a podcast 3 years ago, off on another YouTube channel. That's how much I call it that. But, by and large, this is why NXT keeps failing. It's not because the wrestlers are bereft of talent. The WWE is filled with the most talented wrestlers out there that make a forward television show turn into a six that can bring consistent pay-per-views just like last night, just based on athletic talent and wowing moments. It's not that these wrestlers can't do it. It's that they're not given the tools to go next level, to ultimately succeed. Is that a fear of a new John Cena or a new Rock that will become a box office or out of wrestling star? Probably more than likely. But even without that, what could be the other excuse? Asking too high for a new contract? Getting companies like AEW or Impact Wrestling to pay attention when your contract is up? A lack of loyalty down the road when the creative or Vince would need you. There are many different reasons to fear the worst to make these guys actually good. But living your life in fear in any prospect of life is a bad thing. And sadly, the WWE isn't really living in a time warp set on its own nostalgia. It's living in fear of a future that may just ultimately pass them by anyway. It's the fear of things not turning out. It's the fear of the torch being, well, extinguished, dead, gone. And yes, I will blame the fans, as I will always do on this show. It's the fear of the internet. It's the fear of the here today, gone tomorrow internet fan who changes their mind on a whip and a dime, week to week, being inconsistent, not believing in the kayfabe universe, not educating themselves in the wrestling business or psychology. Wrestling is theater, and the fact that the modern day wrestling fan doesn't understand the theatrical parts of what makes wrestling is what's hurting internet discourse or even discussion about this sport from a fan's point of view, at least from my vid's point. But this also creates a massive trickle down effect that has unfortunately not only reached the creative and the people in charge and the people signing checks, it's reached the wrestlers. Goldberg and Undertaker calling the young generation soft? Well, it depends on what you consider the word soft to mean. You mean soft as unable to take bumps are not tough enough to handle the grind. These young guys, they're not soft in that degree, but mentally able to take criticism and the slings and arrows, or to be faithful to kayfabe in the fictional world, that it is their job as theater athletes to create. Now that they become soft. And as a person that has taken theater his whole entire existence, a good actor, a good theater maker, a good movie actor, anybody, a good writer, anybody that works in lines of fiction in any degree is only as good as the educational resources and adaptation to those resources. In other words, wrestlers are only as good as the talent you have, one, but the teachers who teach you. If you're stuck with bad teachers or teachers that are underwhelming or are told not to teach you to a certain level, it's going to come down to it. Your degree of quality is automatically going to suffer because of the lack of teaching materials. It's just like teaching your kid in school the finer points of something like economics or civics. Because they don't teach it properly or correctly, you have a lot of misinformed, miseducated kids going to school and going into business and places of work, unable to balance a checkbook. Unfortunately, this is what the WWE has become. It's become a bunch of young wrestlers that some of them may be unable to balance a checkbook, but 90% of them, in fact, 93% of them, can't balance their career and their character. And sadly, it's not their fault. It's by design. NXT is meant to create drones. It's meant to create people that will obey the old wrestling cycles that are born out of old ideas from 40 years ago, and yes, racism. The NXT system is built to make sure the droney status quo of big guys being world champions and old established hats winning the title over and over again remains the status quo. Until the factory starts building a better mold, the WWE isn't going to get any better. And the only way that it creates a better mold is if the fans become more educated to how flawed the mold is. The mold isn't moldy from the top. It's moldy from the bottom because of the top. Because the way the WWE is designed now, just like the stock market was exposed, the wrestling world has become exposed. And if things don't change, expect Vince McMahon to take himself in his early 80s and cash out, leaving the wrestling world and WWE rotting from its foundation. The foundation is supposed to be the performance center. Sadly, the WWE's first stage of development may be its worst. And that's my thoughts from the throne room and the end of the first Goofy Wrestling Bullshit. Thanks for joining me. As I said before, every Saturday morning, including this upcoming Saturday morning, thereafter, you will get another one of these recapping Raw and SmackDown and NXT. AEW will come later, but only if you demand it. Because I don't like their brand of product, but I'm willing to give a little bit. So, let me know if that interests you. Sometimes, I'll be doing the Wrestle Game Rewind with my co-host for this show and partner in crime, Tyler Wooters, for the Wrestling Rewind Network, and hopefully, with their help, I can get some massive support here too. Let me know your thoughts on the Royal Rumble and the thoughts on my throne room commentary for this week. But until next week, I'm Nirvana Sparkle. Find peace in your own Nirvana, and remember, no matter how goofy or how much bullshit wrestling can sometimes be, remember, we all love this stuff, and all the pain is worth the love it brings. I'll see you this Saturday for episode 2.